The average Jujutsu sorcerer within Jujutsu Kaisen could do one domain expansion in a day, and most people can't even do a domain expansion at all. But now it makes you realize, if you have a domain expansion, what is the point of fighting in the first place? You know, the hand-to-hand combat that you do, or the curse technique that you use, what's the point of doing it if you have a domain expansion? From the looks of it, everybody should just use the domain expansion and then call it a day. What is the actual point of trying to do it any other way? Because although you can use a simple domain, it's not as good as a domain expansion. It would lose 9 times out of 10 depending on your opponent. And that brings me to the fight, which has spammed domain expansions quite a lot, the Gojo vs Sukuna fight. This is not the first time Jujutsu Kaisen have quote-unquote spammed domain expansions. The last time that we've encountered something like this was with Hakuri Kinji, because he had the accessibility to his gambling. In this situation is a constant clash of heads when it comes to the domain expansion. That changes everything. Now you're probably wondering where I'm going with this. There is a problem with domain expansions, but I'm gonna go into it and why there is a problem. If you haven't already, make sure you leave a like. Also subscribe if you're new, as it would be much appreciated. And let's explore a little bit of the domain expansion problem in more ways than one. So the first problem I'd like to address would be the fundamental, which is, if you encounter somebody that has a domain expansion, what is a good reason for them not to use it straight away? From a reader's perspective, if there was just domain expansions all the time, straight away, it would be quite boring. In fact, it would deteriorate the quality of fights that we've had in the past. It always seems like the best type of fights we can get is if both people are not using domain expansions. Gojo and Sukuna being the exception, because that fight is insane. But even then, it lets you wonder, the pinnacle of Jujutsu sorcery being domain expansion battles is what was represented to us. They changed the domain expansion battles on the fly, they were able to adapt it however they pleased, and they were also able to counter each other in the process. Using it in that velocity, in that much intensity, very different. Due to their outputs, they both have exceptional use of their curse energy, making this domain expansion fight an anomaly. But then when you look at somebody else within Jujutsu Kaisen, for example, if Yuta and Kenjaku encounter each other, is the goal really to weaken the person before you use the domain expansion? Or is the goal to use the domain expansion and whoever wins in the end ends up winning? The thing that makes me wonder that there is more thinking to using your domain expansion than usual is the interaction between Yuki and Kenjaku. When Yuki and Kenjaku both encountered each other, you can clearly see they were thinking if they could use the domain or not on Kenjaku's side, saying if you thought you could win the domain battle, you would have used it. So he decided to use it instead. So did that mean that Yuki would have used it straight away and there would have been a domain expansion straight away if Tengen wasn't involved? And if that's the case, does that mean all fights should just have domain expansion straight away, just to show how confident or not confident somebody is? What would be the justification in not using your domain expansion straight away if it's the pinnacle of Jujutsu sorcery? For example, Mahito, anyone he encounters, he should just use the domain expansion because he knows it's almost a guaranteed win, unless they have a domain expansion themselves. And it seems like the stronger you are as a Jujutsu sorcerer, the stronger your domain expansion. So if that's the case, in battle, they should be able to use if they're stronger than the opponent or not, and then be able to use the domain expansion at will. And that would be only from fighting in the beginning, which could be the justified reason. Unless there's a confidence issue when it comes to using the domain expansion, I don't understand the reason why people wouldn't use it. Now, the problem right now in the Sukuna versus Gojo fight is that they can't use the domain expansions anymore. From a viewer perspective or reader perspective, this is excellent. Now we get to see nice hand-to-hand combat using their curse techniques to their maximum ability, and we might encounter a maximum technique. This is something that has been shown very few times within the Jujutsu Kaisen series, so at least we'll be able to see it there and then, potentially. Let's dissect the reason why they can't use the domain expansion anymore. And this reason was a very interesting reason. In a domain expansion, when you use it, afterwards there's a curse technique burnout. This means that you have to wait for your curse technique to finish its cooldown naturally so you can be able to use it anyhow. But when it comes to Gojo and Sukuna, you can see they constantly use the domain expansions, and instead of letting the cooldown actually complete, they use RCT, reverse curse technique, to heal their cooldown so it can speed up the process. This is very effective, but it's very bad when you do it constantly. The reason it actually gives you brain damage. It takes a piece of your brain where your curse technique is actually used from innately, and you healing it doesn't allow the cooldown to complete, so you're basically destroying bits of your brain to be able to use it to your fruition. Normal Jujutsu sorcerers wouldn't even be able to enter the realm to be able to do this unless you have the capability of summoning multiple domain expansions, which I don't think most people can. Maybe Yuta Kotsu could learn and be able to do this, but beside that, this seems like a little cheat code that you can be able to do, but it's very, very risky. You'd think somebody that has the 6 eyes and the limitless, who's able to heal himself all the time, wouldn't have this brain damage issue, but it seems like he does. Even Shoko Yeri was kind of surprised at the fact that Gojo was able to get this brain damage. And during the hidden inventory arc, if you remember, Gojo said that he can continuously heal his brain 24 hours around the clock. So you would be surprised that his brain is getting destroyed. This is something that's not too far from his ballpark, but it seems like the anatomy of a human just doesn't work like that. He may be able to refresh his brain, but it seems like he's not able to heal his brain after the curse technique burnout was being used. It has gotten so bad to the point where Sukuna said if you use your domain expansion again, you will die. And the fact that Gojo will die because he used domain expansion one more time shows the pure problematic danger of the domain expansion. As it was once said, this is the pinnacle of Jujutsu sorcery. These two have reached their limit in both different ways. Gojo's unlimited void, even though it was countered by Maharaga, was able to still affect Sukuna to a large degree, affecting his brain as well. And now it's claimed to be impossible for him to call out the domain expansion again. This might result to him using the 10 shadows a bit more now, because he doesn't have the domain expansion to overwhelm Gojo anymore. They are both reaching their limits, fighting each other to the best of their ability. Now, I would also add to that the fact that the domain battles that they do be having, if it has showed us anything, it shows us if they waited for each other to have a burnt out curse technique, they might still be able to use the domain expansion continuously. Gojo obviously doesn't have a limit from the looks of things, whereas Sukuna definitely has a limit. Does this emphasize that Satoru Gojo is one of the most unique characters in Jujutsu Kaisen, being able to use domain expansion at will every time his curse technique will be healed? I feel like this is a good indicator to show the people that a domain expansion battle cannot last forever. There is always going to end up being a point where you have to fight each other unless you get smoked in the domain expansion as a whole. But until that is the point, the domain expansion problem is only a problem depending on perspectives. So for Jujutsu sorcerers, you can see the problem they have is the ability to do it in the first place, the possibility of spamming it causing major problems, or fighting somebody that has it and you have to use a simple domain in the process. But for us as the viewers, we would see from the perspective of a domain expansion, why would they not be able to do it straight away to be able to encounter each other? Because what do they have to lose if they have a domain expansion and they could win just off that alone? Because we always have to remember 5 domain expansions is what was used. 5 times Sukuna had to battle Gojo's domain expansion, whereas Sukuna has done it less, which is ironic because they both have the same amount of damage. This same amount of damage has definitely shown that both of them are genuinely equal in this fight. Everyone is affecting everyone in the same way. The only difference is that Sukuna uses Maharaga, which is kind of a cheat code, but we'll leave that for another day. We don't have to talk about that too much now. Anyway guys, this seems to be around the end of the video. If you haven't already, make sure you leave a like, subscribe if you're new. I would always appreciate when you guys come and do so. If you want to see more content, there's some stuff on the screen right now. And as I say to the new people, they'll come and visit my channel. Jana.